Hello, I'm Laura Knights, CEO of Knights Consulting, creator of BlackWomanLeading.com, and the host of Black Woman Leading, the podcast. This podcast amplifies the needs and experiences of Black women leaders in the workplace with a holistic focus on three core areas: leadership development, mental wellness, and relationship management. Our ultimate aim is to help Black women learn, heal, and grow in their leadership capacity. Hey there, before we get started with the next podcast episode, I wanted to let you know that enrollment is now open for our January 2025 cohorts for both the early career and the mid-career programs. Now, our programs provide just-in-time support based on where you are along your career journey. In our programs, they are holistic in nature. So yes, we will create leadership development plans. You will get training to strengthen your leadership skills. You'll get coaching. You'll do all this in community and through the unique lens of your experience as a Black woman. But we won't just focus on your career. We'll focus on you and your holistic success. So we'll talk about your wellness. We'll talk about resilience, overcoming burnout, and you'll also create a self-care plan in our programs. So whether you're early career, developing those foundational leadership skills, or mid or senior level, really looking at strategy and what's next for you in this season of your career, we have something for you. Now, our programs also include a ticket to our annual leadership conference, Black Woman Leading Live, happening in May 2025. So you can visit our website at www.blackwomanleading.com. Click on the program's menu header and you'll see the options and also the next steps to explore if our programs are right for you. All right, welcome everyone to today's episode. We're talking about navigating life changes with Kumari Williams. So Kumari, welcome to the Black Woman Leading podcast. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm excited about today.
Yeah, we're going to get into this topic that I know quite a bit of our listeners can connect with. But first, let me give you all the official on Kumari. Kumari L. Williams holds the position of Vice President of VIBE, Value, Inclusion, Belonging, and Equity at Workday. With a passion for fostering inclusive, supportive, and equitable work environments, she serves as a visionary thought leader in the talent domain. Kumari spearheads strategic initiatives, including the Employee Belonging Council, Giving and Doing, and disability inclusion programs. Her vision revolves around fostering an environment in which each person feels esteemed, respected, and equipped to unleash their fullest potential. With more than 2 decades of experience and a comprehensive track record in developing and executing effective strategies, Kumari brings her invaluable knowledge and insights to her position. Prior to joining Workday in 2021, Kumari worked in various senior leadership positions at Harman International and ADP. These roles including serving as the Senior Director of Global Talent Management and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Senior Director of Talent Acquisition and Employer Branding, and Director of Client Operations. So Kumari and her devoted husband, originally from Metro Detroit, currently reside in Georgia. They actively engage in their church and community activities alongside their 2 sons, fostering a strong sense of belonging and purpose. I love it. And I have never heard a VP of Vibe before. I love it. I love it. I love it. So we're going to get more into learning about Kumari and her role as a leader and this topic on kind of navigating life transitions. But I always like to say why this topic, how we met. We met through Linda at Salary.com, who is a friend to Black Woman Leading. She has been a speaker at our conference the last 2 years. So we just love her and her energy. So when she says, oh, you should connect with this person, I'm like, send the email. You know, if you said it, I need to be talking to her. But, you know, when we got on the phone, we didn't know what we wanted to talk about. And just talking about life and our experience as leaders, as mothers, and all these different roles we play, this topic emerged. So I'm excited to jump into this. But before we get into the topic, let me ask you, Kumari, the question we always get started with. What does the phrase Black woman leading mean to you? And can you just share a little bit? We heard your bio, but just your journey as a Black woman leading and how you came to do the current work that you're doing.
Yeah, I've been a people leader for a really, really long time. I think I would say my second job, I got promoted pretty quickly. So I started out in human resources, which is where I'm at today. But I moved into recruiting specifically. And so at the job that I was at, I got, promoted to a recruiting manager, and I was maybe 23, 24. I mean, I was really, really, really young. And I look at obviously the journey from who I was then as a Black woman leading to now a much more older Black woman leading. And I feel like I have come into my own. It's taken some time, but I really have come into my own. And when you say, what does it mean to be a Black woman leading? It is being able to understand how I feel about me and being able to understand that you are going to receive me maybe differently than how I feel about myself, but I've got to be confident in who I am and what I bring to the table, regardless of what your perceptions of me are, whether they're true or not true. And so I think my journey has been one of like increasing my confidence as a Black woman and being able to say, you know what, I do good work, and it's okay to say that I do good work. So that has been, you're so often taught to be humble.
Yes.
And you can be humble, but you can also acknowledge that you do good work. And I am a good leader, and I am a Black woman. So that's kind of what it's been like for me, my journey, and what it means to me.
Yeah. Can you just share too, just a little bit about your current role? I love, whenever we can introduce our listeners to people who are really operating in a strategic capacity, because that's where many of them, especially our mid-career kind of listeners, are aiming to get out of the weeds and step up in this leadership. Can you just share a little bit about what that day-to-day looks like in your strategic role?
You know what? I can. And it's interesting because you say get out of the weeds. I think one of the things that makes me good is that I can get in the weeds, and I can also get back up into the clouds where I should spend the majority of my time, but I'm still able to get down there and understand what's happening. I think, so often in our careers, you get so senior that you have no clue what's happening at the levels below you. And you do have to be able to know when to ascend and when to kind of descend. But I spend a lot of my time making sure that the strategy that we set, that we're holding true to that. And by that meaning, my title is Value, Inclusion, Belonging, and Equity. That is our direction for DEI at our organization. And so we spend a lot of time ensuring that our employees or our workmates understand what inclusion means, what belonging means, and what equity means. And so as a result, we have initiatives that are centered around those three pillars. And my job is to ensure that we're tracking the success of those and that we're tracking the portfolio of work that supports those initiatives. So it's really operational and focused on, having tangible, measurable results. And I think that, as you move forward in your career, you are going to continue to be pressed for what are the outcomes? What are you trying to drive? How does this impact the enterprise? Not just the warm and fuzzy. You have to be able to show the tangible results.
Yeah, I love that you talk about that agility, because we really try to get our participants in our programs to work on building both of the skill sets, because you don't want to lose touch, right? And you're really highlighting that, sometimes this view of moving up into senior or executive leadership is like you just stay strategic. You're talking about, no, I have to have tangible outcomes, outputs. So there's still very much a tactical element to the work, but I need to be able to create the big picture and kind of live in the future and the present at the same time. I love that.
You do, or you can choose not to. But I think my value uniquely has been that I have the ability to do both, and to do both. And I'm not claiming to be perfect at both, but do both sufficient enough to where it becomes a value add. I think initially I thought, all right, I need to make sure that I'm staying at XYZ altitude. I was pushing myself when I was promoted to a VP to stay at this altitude. And I think I was talking to a friend of mine who's an executive recruiter. And she said, actually, what's changing, it's changing, right? We want executives that can flex back and forth.
Yes.
The days of having to just stay really, really strategic, and that's the only place you play. She said, no one has the luxury of that anymore.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. So it forced me to say, I'm going to embrace both sides of me. And I've been that was actually like an aha moment of like, don't suppress this, lean into both, the tactical and the strategic at the same time. I have to flex between the program managers that report to me and project managers that report to me, and then also providing the right altitude of leadership for the director that reports to me. I can't manage a director the same way I manage.
Exactly.
And so knowing that stretches me.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So it's that agility and that being able to be adaptable to what's needed in the moment.
That's
I'm
right.
hearing you say is really a value add. I love
That's
that.
right.
Okay, so let's jump into navigating these life challenges, okay? Because when we had our kind of intro conversation, we had a little bit of an amen corner going on as we were talking about these things. So, as you think about this season of your leadership, what are some of the changes, the life changes you're navigating, and what strategies have you been able to implement to support you in this season?
Yeah, my goal, Laura, is to be able to get through this and not cry. So that's what I'm going to
We welcome tears. It's okay.
That is the goal. I will say, they talk about, the pressure that you feel when you have aging parents and you're still raising kids, and you have people that alongside of you that are friends that are they're getting sick or their parents are. But when you're experiencing it yourself for the first time, it is hard. And that's the reality of where a lot of us are. And then don't be, headed into menopause or in menopause.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So I'm like questioning my sanity on a daily basis, or trying to figure out in full transparency, did I show up right on that meeting? Because I know how I felt, but like, how did they receive me? And so a lot of where I find myself spending my time is just checking in on me. Is those check-ins, and it's literally daily. I have small children, and a lot of our friends that are our age, or my husband's age, he's a couple years older, their kids are grown and out of the house. So we're a little bit behind, but I have small kids. I have parents in their 70s. I have a dear friend of mine that passed away less than 2 months ago, and that's life right now.
Wow.
That's literally crisis to crisis is what it is. And I will say it doesn't change. It is how resilient you can be without falling apart over everything. I said to someone the other day, I can't fall apart over everything. I can't. It's too much. I would literally I'd have to pick myself up every day and peel myself up off the floor. So when I need to fall apart, I do, but it can't be over everything.
Yeah. And I've been a caretaker of an aging parent while being a mother to a toddler at the time. And still doing your career and all of that. And I love that you mentioned the self-checks. It's so critical because I think we are often in position, leaders in family, leaders in community, leaders at work, leaders at church, where it's expected that we're checking for other folks, right? And prayerfully, we're in a place that we have someone checking for us, but checking for self, right, is not intuitive to everybody. It's not intuitive for everybody. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But what have you kind of been leaning into for support while you are navigating all of these things?
I'm going to be honest. I think for the very first time in my marriage, I'm really leaning fully on my husband. Or my version of fully. Like, I'm not there.
still with a little kickstand over here, but
I feel like I'm getting better about, next to God, he's next to got me for real, and I'm leaning into him being, me being okay with, like, his job is to make sure I'm okay and to check on me and be okay with. That is his role. Let him do that. My mom came to visit a couple of weeks ago, and my husband, I forgot to get something at the grocery store, and my husband asked me twice, like, do you want me to go back and get it? And I was like, no, I got it. No, I got it. The next time my mama got me alone, she was like, you better let that man go to the grocery store if he asks.
Come on and help us, mama. Help us, mama.
Right? But I am so used to, when you talk about Black women leading, we are used to throwing it on our back.
Yeah.
A lot of us are built like that. I don't know where it comes from. I don't pride myself on being strong. It certainly isn't the messaging I heard being, reared as a child. But I think in these environments, corporate starts to shape us and we're like, all right, I'm a team of me.
Yeah.
And I got to show up. I got to make sure it's right. I got to throw it on my back. And oftentimes we are in these roles where we're cleaning up stuff too.
Yeah.
So but all to say, I'm trying to lean more on my husband, honestly, because I need it. And that's the truth.
And we love a husband we can lean on, because I don't know where I'd be without mine. I mean, similar to, it's really a gift. It's a blessing. And of course they lean on us too, but to have that support, and like I'm hearing you say, to really open yourself up to fully receiving the gift, right? That he is willingly, eagerly offering, right? It's back to that self-check, again.
Yeah.
So when you think about, caretaking and mothering and all these different roles we play as leaders, have you found, as you're navigating these different life transitions, that your leader identity, how you see yourself, or your approach to leading others has been impacted? And if so, does that, sometimes that shift is okay. Sometimes that shift feels, how are you managing that, or have you even experienced that, I'll say?
So I'm going to tell you a story. I mentioned I was promoted really early. So I was in my early 20s, didn't have any kids, wasn't married at the time. And I had an employee of mine she was newly married, had children. And I remember her asking me if she could work from home. I had one employee that was working from home. And so she thought, all right, I'm going to get this same arrangement. And I remember going to my mom and saying, like, why does she want to work from home? So she can have her kid on her lap while she's trying to work, and I'm not going to get no productivity. I was like, just ugly. And my mom said to me, as she does most often in her wisdom, she said, one day you will get it.
Wow.
One day you will understand. Now, I will tell you, I'm a decent human. I didn't say no to work from home. I didn't say no, but I had a lot of commentary, in my head, and certainly with my mom about it, because I couldn't relate to what I now call is the mom hustle. Couldn't relate to it at all. And the juggle that most of us are trying to do. We want a career. We want to be a mom. We want to be a wife, a sister, a friend, all these things.
Yeah.
And how can they all play together cohesively, or as cohesively as possible? So I use that example to say is I could not relate at that time. Now I can, and I extend a lot of grace to my team and to those that are around me, because the truth is we're navigating a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And what I have realized over the years is how I'm built is not necessarily how you're built, Laura.
Yeah.
Everybody, we all have the same kind of makeup, same parts, but what you can handle is different than what the next person can handle. And so if I need to be out for 2 weeks for bereavement leave, that doesn't mean that that's the standard. That just means it only took me 2 weeks to be able to pull myself back together to come to work.
Yeah.
It might take another person a month after losing. So I'm just learning to extend a lot more grace and to not judge people. Doesn't mean I don't have thoughts or opinions, but I can't judge the why behind whatever the thing is. I'm just say, you know what, I'm going to extend some grace and understanding.
Yeah. And I'm hearing the empathy has increased, and you know how when we go through these life transitions as well, it increases our capacity to see the humanity in other people, right? Because we are asking we need that which we need to give too. And so I love that. So in keeping with this empathy, which we know is part of emotional intelligence, when we were on our kind of intro call talking about this episode, you referenced the importance of really leveraging our emotional intelligence when we're going through seasons of transitions or change. Can you share a little bit more about, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has been an area of opportunity for me is taking feedback, right? It doesn't feel, when you're a person that feels like you're achieving well, or you care about how people perceive you, you want to be known as a person that does really good quality work, and you're pushing yourself really hard. when you get feedback that's contrary, or shoot, in my case, any feedback,
Yeah.
it's hard. It is really, really hard to hear that maybe you didn't hit the mark or there's something you could have done differently. And so that emotional intelligence to say, there are people that see you, like for real see you.
Yeah.
And, in my case, my leader, who is phenomenal, she sees me, meaning there are things that I don't always do right, or there are things that I can do differently. And that emotional intelligence to say, I have to trust that this person's going to give me insight about me that I don't know.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence to say that I'm not perfect in every area. I remember going through like marital counseling or something like that with my husband, and the person was talking about blind spots. And I was like, I don't believe in that.
What is that?
Yeah, like, no, I know me. and was serious. I mean, I say it jokingly, but I have a hard time processing that there would be something about me that I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I, as of late, am getting more okay with. And I use my marriage as an example because it's probably the worst of me, if I'm honest. At work, we get used to I am conditioned in a way to, like, I know how to show up. I know how to be great. I can do that really, really well. In a marital context, I don't do it as well, and I don't take the feedback as well. And I have a harder time thinking like this person, whereas it should be easy in a marriage, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For everybody else, it probably is. It just isn't for me. But as of late, I've been sitting with, oh, you know what? Maybe you did do that thing wrong, and maybe you are offensive, and maybe you are abrasive, or whatever the thing is. And I think getting to a place of where I'm open to sitting with the discomfort of being wrong.
Yeah.
Which is hard when you're a perfectionist. It's hard. It's probably more the feedback of, I actually could be wrong and I might be a jerk. That is hard for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? It's two things that's coming up for me as you're talking. My husband and I think last season or the season before last on the podcast, I can't remember. He's the first man on Black Woman Leading podcast. And we did an episode on leading in love and what leadership lessons we learned from being married.
Wow.
And next Friday, we'll celebrate 21 years of marriage.
Wow.
And when I tell you the biggest lessons I've learned about myself, you're talking about holding up a mirror, you're talking about check yourself, boo, and get your life together, has been from one, being married, and two, from being a parent. And so it's so much, but with your kid, you can, it's really about your own self-awareness until they get older, like this 15-year-old I got now, to really, start to reflect. But with your spouse, they're telling you the thing that's not going. So, that we hear a lot, and we do a lot of leadership training. We hear a lot of feedback. We train on feedback, but nobody really trains us on receiving. Most of the trainings you get in the leadership program is on giving feedback, how to do it appropriately. And we started training in the last year on how to receive. There's a great book, if you're listening and this resonates with you. It's called Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone and Sheila Heem. And in it, they talk about there's 3 resistance triggers. And Kumari, you sharing your kind of perspective on feedback really brought it to mind. These are the things that make it hard for us to receive feedback. And they talk about 3 triggers. One is a truth trigger, meaning there's something about it is just wrong. Like, that's just not right. So how am I going to even engage with that? So it's a truth trigger. The second one is a relationship trigger. So something about you giving it to me, like, how dare you, after all I've done for you, that kind of thing. And then the third part, which I think really hits me a lot of times when I find myself being resistant to feedback, is an identity trigger. So like the point you said, something about this constructive feedback you're giving me doesn't resonate with who I know myself to be. So it's not just about this little situation. You're challenging my identity.
That's right.
Which, that's hard, right?
It is hard. Laura, I'm going to tell you something. I watched maybe, I don't know, about an hour's worth of material in our learning management system today that Sheila Heem did.
She's good.
So literally today, I was watching her, and she did it was all about feedback. So what you're saying is so timely. Yeah,
that book, if you struggle with receiving feedback, That book is really a gift. I recommend it to a lot of my coaching clients too. So let's talk about this. When we were kind of ideating around this topic today, we talked about this tension between centering yourself and serving the others in your life, especially when you're playing these different roles as a leader, a caretaker, a mother, roles where you're supposed to be nurturing other people, right? That's part of the job. And that there's this tension sometimes between that. When you think about, your leadership journey and even the current season you may be in, how do you create or decide where the lines for those boundaries are for yourself?
Yeah, that one is a hard one for me, and I don't know that I've got it perfect yet.
Yeah.
I struggle. I am more of an introvert naturally. And so I'm a bit more reserved probably with what I share, more so just because, to your point, I don't want to be centered.
Yeah.
I don't want people to overdo anything on behalf of me. But I also recognize that there are people that care about you and they do want to check in and they do want to support you. So I would say, I have to get rid of like the false humility and be honest, like when I actually do need support and I actually do need people to check in on me. But I try not to operate in a way that's really hierarchical. You know what I mean? Like just because I'm the leader of the team, like I mentioned, I lost my best friend and I was really selective about who I shared that with, not because I didn't want people to acknowledge it, but more everybody's going through crisis constantly. And my thing is no more important than your thing. And so I'm mindful of not making my life, my kids, my whatever, the center for other people, because we all have something. And I think that as leaders, it's something we should be really mindful of, because there is this dynamic and this hierarchy and this power dynamic that will unintentionally, some cases with executives, have you very centered, very. And I just always push myself to say, like, I can link up with anybody and hang out, whatever. It's important to me to maintain who I am and be grounded in a very real identity and not be this version of myself that people have put in a place that's just not on a pedestal somewhere. So I'm mindful of not centering myself because it's incongruent with who I am.
Yeah. And it's back again to those self-checks, because there's one hand, like you said, as a leader in the space, I'm not elevating my humanity over anybody else's, my challenges over anybody else's. But then there's this other places that normally come up in our personal life that's like, let that man go to the grocery store for you. Would you let that man go to the grocery store, right? So there's this, balance. And again, it's back to the self-checks. As you said, what's in alignment with you is back to knowing our own value system and our own integrity. And sometimes we're outside of that, right? But how do we have those checks? Or if we're blind on it, having those people in our circle that love us, that'll give us that self-check to remind us, like, you are literally beside yourself. Let's get back into alignment. I love it. So we know with change and transition comes grief sometimes, even when it's a positive change, right? And I think, it's so interesting this week, lots of conversations around grief, and we're recording this right after, a couple of days after our presidential election. Last night, with our Black Woman Leading community, we hosted a session just to help us regulate our central nervous systems. We were doing deep breathing and grounding and resourcing and just, because life is life and there's so many messages and we're being bombarded with stuff, arguing with people on social media and all this kind of stuff. But I bring all of that. This conversation about grief has come up several times this week, and that sometimes, especially in a professional context, there's been a major change. There's been a leadership shift. There's been something that we had to let go of. And we can think about that at work. We can think about that in our personal life. There's oftentimes a instinct that some people have to kind of gloss it over. To kind of, I'm even looking at some of the correspondence this week around the elections, people disappointed. And, the next day, like, okay, there's work to do. Yes, there is, but there's space to grieve and to process too, because the work is going to be there. So I say all of that, have you experienced or been able to identify with yourself as you talk about these different life changes and transitions that you have experienced in this season where you acknowledge that there is something that you have had to let go or maybe grieve something?
Yeah. So when we moved to Atlanta, we were probably here, man, I don't even remember how many months. And then my dad passed away back in
Mm,
Detroit. So we make this big life change. So I take a job at Workday. I and my family and I, we moved to Atlanta. My dad passes away, which is hard because I get a phone call out of the blue and they're saying that they found him and he had passed away.
wow.
And then fast forward, I lose my father-in-law and then I lose my best friend. And so you're talking about a lot of grief that starts to just layer.
Yeah.
You might have individually dealt with each of those situations. Me, probably not so much the more recent one of losing my friend, but you grieve those along the way. But then when they continue to layer, it's almost like you have to reheal
Yeah.
because it just adds another layer of like, goodness gracious, all this loss in 2 years, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process through. And I will say that for me, I try to be, and I'm not great at it again, but I try to make sure that I give me what I need.
Yeah.
And it may look different than the next person. Oftentimes I kind of shift pretty quickly, like, all right, Kumari, you've given yourself enough time. It's time to push forward. But I will say with the loss of my friend, I'm in a space where like I don't want any more.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
no more. I just want to have a season of not having issues. My stepfather was having some real health challenges, and so while he's healthy and he is recovered, that's still grief, and you're still
Yes.
navigating that. So one of the things that I have done is just be really honest about myself when I am struggling
Yeah.
and be able to say that out loud and be able to, like you said, make space for it. And I was on a flight, this was last week, and it reminded me of when I was on the flight when I went to my
Mm,
best friend's funeral. And I'm just on the flight just crying, right?
yeah.
And I was like, you know what it is. I'm not going to try to rush past this so that I'm not embarrassed and so that the flight attendants aren't doing too much. I just sat there and let the tears roll.
Yeah.
And I think you have to, like you said, you have to make space for it. You do.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, is that there's the need to process, right? Because especially when it's layer upon layer upon layer, we're re-triggered, right?
Yes,
And things that are familiar remind us of certain things. So I love that you're giving yourself the time. Of course, we send our condolences to you and your
thank
family,
you.
but that you're giving yourself the time and really honoring your own humanity in that way.
I appreciate it.
There is so much to unpack on this topic of navigating life transitions, but of course, we have limited time. I do want to shift and ask you some of our core questions for the season, but any final thoughts on this topic before we transition to those few questions?
I think I would just encourage your listeners, if you are a woman that is aspiring to get into leadership, make sure that you continue to increase your confidence in yourself. One of the things that I thought would happen along the way is that people are going to know who I am and what I got and what I bring to the table. And I'm realizing they may never know, and
Yeah,
that's okay. And I think one lesson that I would give you is to make sure that you feel good about you. And that transcends what other people might think about you. Still sharpen your tools, make sure that you're good at your craft, but that none of that replaces the confidence that you should just have and the self-love that you should have, and
yeah,
not looking and seeking validation from folks in corporate America that they don't have to see you. They don't
yeah.
have to know what you bring to the table. You should know and be clear enough to let them know when they don't know. But I would say that's what I will offer to your audience and
Yeah,
to your listeners.
that's beautiful. And I love that you said self love and self confidence because sometimes we conflate those. Your self love is about your sense of worthiness, right? Yourself, you could be self confident in your skills and your capacity and have very low self love or self esteem. So I love that you raised up both this sense of worthiness outside of anything I'm doing. And then also this sense of confidence in the things that I am doing, I am
That's
equipped
right.
to do them. I love it. So a few core questions. So the season 6 theme is community care is critical. And we've already been indirectly talking about leaning into our community. But part of community care is being able to refill your own cup, as you've kind of alluded to today. What does self-care look like for you these days? How are you refilling your cup in the midst of all of this?
Yeah. So I have the very unique, fortunate experience of working with, um, so there's 5 Black women,
Mm,
and myself makes 6. That doesn't happen. So my boss's leadership team is all Black women. So
wow.
when you talk about you need to get lifted real quick, I can text that group and I'm back on
I
track in
love it.
5 minutes. Now the rest of your listeners, they probably don't have the advantage of that. But it's something that's so special about that group of women and us being able to partner and be really vulnerable and transparent with each other. The one thing that I've been doing outside of work is my husband and I just started taking golf lessons.
Ah,
Yeah, so I wanted something that we could both do together as we kind of get into these more like closer to retirement years. And then I also wanted something that he couldn't just beat me at. And so it's proving to hold true that, you know what, you're kind of even on the golf,
I love it.
on the
Now
golf.
you're the second guest in the last 2 months that's been talking about starting to play golf. I'm like, okay, do I need to get back into it? We got a course down the street from my house. I'm like, do I need to get back into it?
Yeah.
I love it. You're enjoying it though. You're enjoying learning.
It's fun because it's like you can put the work in and you can kind of quickly see if I do what the coach says, it'll work out for
I
me.
love
Okay.
it. And
Yeah.
something you all could do together. I love that.
Correct.
Okay, so we want to normalize asking for help in our community because we've been alluding to, today that sometimes that's difficult for us. Can you, as a role model, can you share a time when you've asked for help and it made the difference for you?
I will say, when my boys were little, having both my mother-in-law and my mom help, which for some people they're like, look, I'll take the whole village. That was a big deal for me
Wow.
to allow people into my space to help with, our children.
Yeah.
I realized they don't just need me, they need exposure to, again, the whole village. So
Yes.
I would say that was really hard to say, okay, mama, I do need help, because when you're the one that people look at as strong, got it
Yeah.
together, they don't necessarily, you're not the first on the list of help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the times where when the boys were little, I worked from home and my mother-in-law would come over and help cover calls for me.
Yeah.
Was because I had the fortunate ability to be able to work from home, so which meant I could nurse. I rarely pumped, but she would come over, cover calls, and we did that for a while, and just until it just didn't work anymore. But that's probably a good example where I had to really ask for some help because I really needed it.
Yeah. And it's the muscle, building the muscle to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, last question to land on.
Okay.
I like to think of us as having care superpowers. So,
Hmm.
what do you offer to your community that creates a soft space for them to land with you?
I like to think that I'm a good listener,
Mhm.
and I'm a person that you can call me up anytime and I'm happy to just sit and listen. And then I will ask you, what do you want from me? Do you want my opinion? Do you want support, guidance? How can I support you is usually the question that I ask after people say what they say, because I don't assume that you want my opinion.
Yeah,
And so for that, I think just a listening ear, I can be that to anyone that needs that.
I love it. And we all need a listening ear, right? Well, this has been lovely, Kumari. Thank you so much for your vulnerability and sharing just your journey and inspiring our listeners with your wisdom. Where can people connect with you beyond the podcast?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the best place. I'm on Instagram, but you won't get anything professional there. So we'll stick with LinkedIn.
All right. And we'll make sure we put her LinkedIn, a link in the show notes. So thank you all for listening with us today. If you found this information useful, please share with a friend. We are on all major podcast platforms. You can also listen from our website, blackwomanleading.com. Make sure you follow so you don't miss anything. Favorite, review, review, rate, comment, all the things to help us amplify our reach with these powerful conversations that we're having with Black women at the center. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Black Woman Leading, or again, visit our website at blackwomanleading.com to learn more about us and our work, our programs, our events. And if you'd like to learn about our corporate work that we do with organizations to create more conscious, competent, and confident leaders, you can visit our corporate site at knightsconsultinggroup.com. I'm personally Laura E. Knights on all platforms, and we'd love to connect with you in any of these ways. And until next time, be well.